Hey everyone, and welcome to the Wrongfully Heard Podcast. This is the Wrongfully Heard Podcast.
And wrongfully convicted.
In this case, nobody got justice.
Was wrongly convicted of a miscarriage of justice. We found new scientific evidence proving her innocence.
Thank you for everyone joining today. I'm super excited for another episode of the podcast. Thank you for everyone who has shown support over on my TikTok. I also want to say thank you for the love that everyone has shown over on my last podcast episode on Ronald Cotton. People really found it fascinating and really were driven to learn about the injustices that occurred during that trial and everything. And the amount of anticipation and excitement for this podcast episode. So this may be a long one, so grab a drink, grab a snack, sit back and relax. Today we're going to be discussing a case that actually occurred here in WA, where I currently am filming this podcast episode, and it is the Scott Austic case. So before we begin Scott Austic's story, I will put up the timestamps of the sections that we will be covering today, just in case you want to skip around if you're more interested in certain sections than others. So yeah, they'll be right here. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to set the scene. So a place called Boddington in WA is where this occurred. It was a town with about 1,000 people as the population, and it was 120 kilometers away from Perth. But on the night of December 9th, 2007, Stacey Thorn was brutally murdered. Stacey Thorn was a 34-year-old woman. She was a teacher. She was loved by a lot of people in the area. She was also 22 weeks pregnant. Stacey was found dead about 100 meters away from her home. Evidence has pointed to her staggering out of her home to go find help on the street, but no one was there to attend for her, and she ended up bleeding out. After this tragic attack happened, the police's attention was focused towards Scott Austic, which was Stacey's lover at the time. The police gathered evidence around Scott Austic. The prosecution believed that the motive behind Scott's murder was that he was not happy with the pregnancy that Stacey Thorn was carrying, as he had already had a previous relationship with another woman and 2 children with her. So they believed that Scott didn't want this child, and the way for him to not have another financial or social burden, in the police and prosecution's word, was that he murdered Stacey. To Scott's family, he was a placid, quiet family man who loved his 2 children. He was a happy drunk with no history of violence. This is where the conflict occurs. How does a gentle, happy family man commit such a horrendous act? The state's theory of the crime rests on a timeline that places Austic back at Stacey's home after his housemates went to bed. A theory woven together through circumstantial evidence. In the trial of Scott Austic, the prosecution relied on a cable of strands approach. Unlike a chain of evidence where the failure of one line breaks the case, a cable isn't composed of many individual fibers. Even if one is frayed, the collective strength of the others is intended to exclude any reasonable inference other than guilt. The state argued that while no single piece of evidence was definitive, the accumulation of facts pointed solely to Austic. The key planks included the motive, which the state focused on a text message sent by Austic to Stacey in November. saying, "Do anything for you to not have it, please." This was inferring to Stacey not having the child. The prosecution argued that the pregnancy represented a financial and social burden Austic was desperate to avoid, fearing he would lose access to his existing daughters if his ex-wife discovered the relationship. The forensic trail. Investigators highlighted DNA and blood found on Austic's rubber thongs in the bathroom and on a Winfield blue cigarette packet on his veranda. Crucially, they focus on Jim Beam cans that they found in the refrigerator. Through batch code analysis, they identified double stamping on a white can found near the crime scene that matched a can in Austic's fridge, allegedly providing the can came from the same 6-pack that was in the fridge purchased by a housemate that evening. Opportunity. Housemates Stephen Henson and Craig Kemp provided the timeline. While Austic was with Stacey earlier for consensual sex, the prosecution alleged that he returned after 10:30 p.m., a window of opportunity after his housemates had retired for the night and before the 11:12 emergency call. The consciousness of guilt. The state pointed to what legally termed are called Edwards lies. So those are lies that are told when someone is guilty. Austic told the police that he was wearing a red Big Day Out t-shirt, but CCTV showed him in different clothing. The prosecution alleged those clothes were burnt in a wood fire heater. To prove the timing, they cited a piece of newspaper advertisement found in the heater, and the newspaper was dated between November 15th to November 22nd to prove that it was recent. The fire was recently lit. Collectively, these strands of evidence convinced the jury that Austic had returned to the unit to extinguish the potential life of his unborn child. But the state's cable was only as strong as the integrity of the hands that wove it. Enter Dr. Clint Hampson and the digital footprint that would change everything. The light bulb moments, allegation of planted evidence. The integrity of a forensic investigation relies on the sanctity of the crime scene. In the Scott Austic case, the emergence of metadata, which is the digital timestamps of police photography, has raised startling questions about whether evidence was discovered or actually introduced by investigators in a controlled crime scene. So first we have the cigarette packet. A photo taken on December 13th by forensic teams shows the veranda table scattered with a bunch of items but no cigarette packet to be found. However, the packet appears in a photo taken on December 14th in plain view. Metadata confirms a 30-hour gap between the two photos. Secondly is the Jim Beam can. Forensic specialists searched the area near Stacey's unit on day 1 and found nothing, stopping at 6:45 p.m. At 7 a.m. the next morning, the can, bearing Austic's fingerprints, was found in plain view across the road. Thirdly and finally, the murder weapon. Methodical line searches by SES volunteers on Tuesday, December 11th, found nothing in the paddock. On Wednesday, December 12th, detectives reportedly found a knife casually while on a smoke break in the same area. The probability of multiple pieces of highly incriminating evidence appearing in a previously cleared, thoroughly searched areas is statistically microscopic. When the state controls a crime scene and evidence materializes over 30 hours later, the presumption of innocence is fundamentally undermined. If these items were not present during the initial forensic sweeps, their later appearance suggests a manipulated narrative. The forensic gap, the knife, and the footprints. Even if we set aside the allegations of planting, the physical mechanisms of the crime do not align with the state's chosen murder weapon. Forensic integrity requires that the tool fits the wound, yet here, the science tells a different story. Drawing from the analysis of experts like Dr. Richard Shepard and Dr. Karen, several forensic inconsistencies emerge. So, blade length versus wound depth. The knife that was claimed to be the murder weapon was a 10-centimeter blade. However, the lethal wound to Stacey's lung was 15 centimeters deep. Dr. Shepard noted that to achieve such depth, the hilt would have had to be driven into the body with force that leaves bruising or grazing. No marks were found. The missing DNA. Despite the prosecution alleging that Austic used his knife for 21 stab wounds, there was not a single trace of Scott Austic's DNA or fingerprints found on the weapon, even though the victim's blood was present on the blade. The unidentified guest. While the house was covered in the victim's blood, investigators found bloodied fingerprints that did not match Scott Austic. These unidentified prints suggest another individual was in the house during or immediately after the attack. In a beyond reasonable doubt standard, these forensic gaps represent massive unresolved variables that challenge the safety of the conviction. The shadow suspects, alternate theories of the crime. In wrongful conviction narratives, the failure of the police to look beyond the obvious is a recurring theme. In this case, there was significant evidence of a third-party culpability that was essentially kept from the jury's full consideration. Comparative analysis of alternative suspects. Denise Thorn, which is Stacey's cousin. Stacey and Denise were embroiled in a long-standing blood feud over a boyfriend. Denise claimed that she was asleep from 10 p.m. on the night of the murder. However, a witness reported her knocking on a door just 70 meters from the murder scene at the time, asking for matches. Furthermore, she was spotted at a fuel station 11 kilometers away at 6 a.m. the next morning, contradicting her claim that she was only woken by the news at 7 a.m. Spencer Thorn, which is Stacey's nephew, then 13 years old, Spencer was noted for a bad temper and possessed specific skill with knives, having been taught to skin kangaroos at an early age. He had a bad history of violence, including an incident where he stabbed a swimming pool after an argument. The critique in the investigation is stark. Despite these individuals being identified as suspects, police reportedly failed to search Denise Thorn's home or secure her fingerprints for DNA. By focusing exclusively on the lover with a text message motive, the investigation may have ignored the very paths that led to the actual perpetrator. Justice delayed or justice denied. Scott Austic was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years. In the eyes of the law, he is a murderer. In the eyes of his family, he is a man doing time for someone else. In the cost of immense spanning of the Thorns, who lost their daughter and grandchild, and the Austics, who lost their son to a prison cell. The core argument for Scott Austic's innocence rests on the happy drunk persona corroborated by his community and forensic case that feels increasingly manufactured under pressure. The pillars of appeal. So in 2020, Scott Austic was acquitted and just recently the Western Australian government granted him $1.6 million in compensation for his wrongful conviction. This payment will never compensate Scott Austic for the long, painful battle to prove his innocence in jail all this time. So this is the end of the episode. I just want to say a huge thank you for everyone for watching this full episode. Let me know in the comments what kind of case you want me to cover next, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and comment down below what you think about the police in this case, the investigation, and your alternative theories. I just want to say that I've seen a lot of comments in my comment section talking about people that you guys know who've been wrongfully convicted, or people who have been wrongfully convicted themselves, and I just want to say that if you have gone through something like this, go to an Innocence Project, get them to look through your case and see if they can find new and fresh evidence to help your side, because no one should ever feel like, even if they've done their time for a crime that they haven't committed, doesn't mean that the justice fight is over. So yeah, please make sure to have a look online on Innocence Projects. It is free of cost most of the time. Thank you everyone for watching the Wrongfully Heard podcast in this episode, where we give voices to people who once were not heard. Thank you and bye everyone.